They say silence is emptiness, a void waiting to be filled. But what if silence is the loudest sound you'll ever hear? That's the paradox Carl Jung pointed to, the idea that silence, especially in the life of an empath, isn't absence but presence magnified. In a culture addicted to noise, where people believe the one who speaks the fastest wins, silence becomes the unexpected revolution. It's like standing in the middle of a storm, watching lightning split the sky, and realizing the real power is not in the thunder, but in the stillness that follows. Picture this: an empath sitting quietly in a room full of arguments. No words, no defense, no explanations, just a calm gaze. The silence unsettles everyone else. Why? Because in that quiet, the unconscious mind of others begins to speak louder than their own logic. Silence acts like a mirror, reflecting back the fears, insecurities, and truths people try to bury. This is not passivity, it's strategy. It's one of the clearest signs you are an empath. Your silence becomes a language others can't ignore, even if they don't understand it. Society tells us the opposite, doesn't it? That silence is weakness. That to survive you must speak louder, argue harder, and fight every battle with words. But empaths know something counterintuitive. Silence protects, heals, and transforms in ways constant talking never could. Judith Orloff calls it one of the empath's greatest survival tools, and Jung hinted that individuation, the path to becoming whole, begins when you stop drowning in noise and start listening to the symbols hidden in the quiet. Silence, then, isn't retreat, it's refinement, like fire turning raw gold into something pure. Imagine what would change in your life if you stopped seeing silence as empty and started seeing it as fertile ground. It's like soil, dark, still, seemingly lifeless. Yet underneath, roots are growing, seeds are breaking open, and life is being prepared in secret. The empath healing journey begins right there, in the unseen. In silence, the inner child feels safe enough to whisper. In silence, trauma doesn't stay buried. It transforms into resilience. And in silence, synchronicity begins to align, pulling together pieces of your story you didn't even know were connected. And history gives us proof. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, described how silence among prisoners in the camp spoke louder than words. Glances, pauses, and quiet gestures carried hope and despair more profoundly than speeches. Silence doesn't erase meaning, it deepens it. That's why Jung's insight feels almost prophetic. The empath's silence isn't void, it's revelation. That's why Jung's insight is so provocative. The empath's silence speaks louder than any words. Louder than defenses, louder than arguments, louder than explanations. It speaks in symbols, in mirrors, in echoes. The real question isn't whether silence communicates. It does. The question is, are you ready to hear what your silence has been saying all along? Because once you do, the world will never look, or sound, the same again. Most people assume silence means nothing is happening, but in truth, the silence of an empath carries more weight than 1,000 well-chosen words. It's as if the unconscious mind speaks through pauses, glances, even the rhythm of breathing. Carl Jung believed silence itself was symbolic, that it held a universe of meaning our conscious mind can barely decode. When someone takes an empath test, they often overlook this. The true signs you are an empath don't just show in what you say, but in what you withhold. If you stop and notice, you'll realize your quiet moments sometimes scream the loudest truths. That silence becomes a blank canvas where others paint their own colors, fears, and unfinished stories. Picture an empath sitting at a noisy dinner table or a crowded meeting. They don't need to speak for their presence to shift the atmosphere. Their silence itself becomes healing for empaths, a quiet force of stability. It's like an invisible dance. While some fill the room with noise, the empath lets the space breathe. That's one of the earliest signs you are an empath, carrying messages in the spaces between words, turning absence into presence and emptiness into depth. But let's be honest, this gift can feel like both blessing and burden. Have you ever stayed quiet during an argument, only to sense that your silence unsettled the other person even more. That's the paradox of empath psychology. Silence doesn't just communicate, it often disarms. While many struggle with how to deal with toxic people, jumping into endless debates, the empath discovers silence can be a shield. It's not weakness, it's strategy. Almost like the unconscious mind is whispering, don't fight fire with fire, just let it burn itself out. Here's the twist. Silence isn't neutral. It's a choice, a stance, sometimes even shadow work happening in real time. By staying quiet, the empath allows their inner child to observe, to breathe, to avoid battles that would only deepen trauma and empathy fatigue. Ever noticed how toxic people often get more rattled when you don't engage? That's because silence reflects their own projection back at them. Jung would call it the mirror of the collective unconscious, where what disturbs them in your silence is really something unresolved within themselves. And if you think silence has no power, just remember the film A Quiet Place. Entire families survived only because they embraced silence as their greatest weapon. What terrified the monsters wasn't the sound of words, it was the discipline of quiet. That's exactly what silence gives to an empath, a weapon that looks fragile but turns out to be unshakable. Which leads us to a deeper dimension, silence as a way of facing your own shadows. Silence isn't just about avoiding noise. For empaths, it can become a doorway to the unconscious mind. Carl Jung spoke often of shadow work, the process of facing the hidden parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. When an empath chooses silence, they aren't running away from conflict. They are tuning into the whispers beneath the surface. Think about it. In the quiet, those unprocessed memories, those moments of trauma and empathy, rise gently to the surface. Instead of drowning them out with chatter, silence creates space for them to be acknowledged. That's the first step in the empath healing journey, listening to what others fear to hear. Picture someone sitting alone after a draining day. They could scroll endlessly through social media, numbing themselves, or they could allow 10 minutes of quiet reflection. In those 10 minutes, their unconscious mind reveals connections they hadn't noticed, like synchronicity, where patterns suddenly make sense. This is why silence matters. It's not empty time, it's analytical psychology at work, showing you the shadows you've been carrying. The empath doesn't always need therapy sessions to begin healing. Sometimes, the silence itself is the therapy. Of course, this isn't always comfortable. Anyone who's practiced shadow work knows silence can feel like staring into a mirror that shows more than you wanted to see. Old wounds, past betrayals, even that neglected inner child start to speak. But this is where healing for empaths takes root. By not running from those voices, by sitting with them in silence, the empath begins individuation, the long path of becoming whole. It's painful, yes, but it's also deeply liberating, like peeling back layers of a mask you didn't realize you were wearing. What's fascinating is how silence changes depending on intention. If you use it to avoid life, it becomes isolation. But if you use it consciously, it becomes transformation. Jungian psychology teaches that the unconscious isn't our enemy. It's a reservoir of energy waiting to be integrated. So when the empath sits quietly with their shadows, they are not surrendering to weakness, they are reclaiming lost strength. This practice may look simple from the outside, but it's one of the most advanced forms of self-discovery. It's where the empath test stops being a quiz and starts being a lived experience. Of course, this isn't always comfortable. Anyone who's practiced shadow work knows silence can feel like staring into a mirror that shows more than you wanted to see. Old wounds, past betrayals, even that neglected inner child start to speak. But this is where healing for empaths takes root. By not running from those voices, by sitting with them in silence, the empath begins individuation, the long path of becoming whole. It's painful, yes, but it's also deeply liberating, like peeling back layers of a mask you didn't realize you were wearing. And history echoes this truth. In HBO's Chernobyl, some of the most haunting moments weren't the explosions or alarms, it was the silence. The quiet rooms where leaders avoided speaking the truth, the stunned faces of workers who knew something was wrong but couldn't voice it. That silence wasn't empty, it was suffocating. It revealed fear, denial, and shadow all at once. Just like in an empath's life, silence sometimes forces the darkest truths into the light. And here's something you can try. Next time you feel overwhelmed, resist the urge to explain yourself to everyone. Instead, sit silently, journal what surfaces, and notice the emotions that arise without judgment. That small act turns silence into a practice of empathy toward yourself. It's how to deal with toxic people inside your own head, the critical voices, the old echoes, the projections. Once you've learned to hold silence as shadow work, you'll see it doesn't just protect you from others. It also reveals what's been hidden all along. And that revelation is exactly what prepares the empath for the moments when silence must act as their invisible shield. There's a reason empaths often choose silence when faced with conflict. It's not because they don't know what to say, but because they know saying it could cost them more than it's worth. Words can be draining, especially when used against toxic people who thrive on chaos. Silence, in these cases, becomes an invisible shield. Jung would argue this isn't avoidance but wisdom, a deeper instinct from the unconscious mind protecting the psyche from unnecessary wounds. And if you've ever walked away from an argument by simply refusing to engage, you've felt that shield in action. Think of it like this. Empaths absorb energy like sponges. Every word exchanged in a heated argument isn't just noise. It's an emotional transaction. For someone already carrying trauma and empathy, that trade is expensive. By staying silent, the empath refuses to buy into the drama. This is one of the most practical signs you are an empath. You learn that not every battle deserves your energy. Silence becomes your boundary, one of the strongest emotional boundaries you can set without ever raising your voice. I once knew someone who worked in a toxic workplace, where sarcasm and backhanded comments flew daily. Instead of snapping back, she practiced strategic silence. Over time, people stopped targeting her because they couldn't get the reaction they craved. That's the secret. Toxic people feed on energy, not truth. If you've ever wondered how to deal with toxic people without burning out, remember this. Your silence starves their chaos. It's not surrender. It's strategy rooted in empath psychology. But here's where it gets interesting. Silence doesn't just protect the empath, it exposes the other. When words are absent, projection takes over. People begin to reveal themselves in the space your silence creates. Jung called this the play of the collective unconscious. What bothers them in you is really what unsettles them in themselves. By staying quiet, the empath unwittingly becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, truth has no place to hide. This is why silence is louder than any defense could ever be. The next time you're drawn into unnecessary conflict, test this for yourself. Instead of arguing, step back, stay quiet, and watch what unfolds. Journal the dynamics afterward. You'll be amazed at what surfaces. This practice doesn't just protect you, it strengthens your empath healing journey. Over time, you'll see silence not only as a shield but as a source of inner power. And once an empath learns to wield silence as protection, the real question becomes, what happens to the people on the other side of that silence? That's where the unconscious echo begins. When an empath chooses silence, something fascinating happens. It doesn't stay empty. Other people rush to fill it, often with their own fears, doubts, or hidden truths. Jung understood this as projection, a phenomenon rooted in the collective unconscious. In your quiet, others begin to reveal themselves. Have you noticed how someone becomes nervous or defensive when you don't answer right away? That's because silence acts like a mirror, and what they see reflected isn't you. It's their own shadow staring back at them. This unconscious echo is one of the most overlooked signs you are an empath. Imagine being at a family dinner. You don't argue, you don't interrupt, you just listen quietly. Soon, someone blurts out what they were really trying to hide. Silence, in this way, becomes a truth serum. It strips away the masks people wear and exposes their raw emotions. That's why empath psychology teaches that silence isn't passive. It's active energy, reshaping the space around you in ways words never could. Think about toxic people for a moment. They thrive on reactions, on pulling you into their storm. But when your silence holds steady, their storm has nothing to feed on. Suddenly, they start revealing insecurities, contradictions, and unresolved anger. This is how to deal with toxic people without confrontation. Let them drown in their own noise while you stand still. It's not that you're avoiding the fight. It's that you've realized the fight was never yours to begin with. Healing for empaths often begins when they stop explaining and start observing. Now, silence also influences healthy relationships, not just toxic ones. For instance, in moments of deep connection, silence allows synchronicity to appear, those uncanny feelings of alignment where words aren't necessary. A partner finishing your thought, a friend sensing your mood before you speak, an inner child memory surfacing in the quiet. These are not coincidences. Analytical psychology shows us that silence deepens bonds because it taps into something beneath language, the unconscious mind that connects us all. Here's a practice you can try. Next time you're in a conversation, pause intentionally before responding. Count to 5. Watch what happens. Many times, people reveal far more in that pause than they would in a direct answer. Journal those observations. It's like your own empath test unfolding in real time. Even modern voices back this up. Susan Cain, in Quiet, shows how silence transforms conversations, while Judith Orloff, in the Empath Survival Guide, teaches that silence is one of the empath's greatest tools for protection and healing. Both echo what Carl Jung suggested long ago, that silence isn't emptiness, but a powerful space where truth rises uninvited. And once you see silence as this unconscious echo, you'll realize it's not just about protecting yourself. It's about unlocking truths hidden in plain sight. And that realization leads to the final secret: silence as the ultimate source of inner power. Silence, for the empath, is never just the absence of sound. It's a reservoir of untapped strength. Carl Jung taught that individuation comes from integrating the unconscious mind, and silence is one of the most effective ways to listen inwardly. Instead of scattering energy on endless explanations, the empath turns quiet moments into fuel for self-discovery. It's here that trauma and empathy no longer feel like burdens, but become raw material for growth. Silence becomes the forge, and the empath the blacksmith, shaping resilience out of stillness. Think about athletes before a big game. Many sit in silence, visualizing the moves they'll make, conserving their energy for the battle ahead. Empaths can do the same, using silence as preparation, not avoidance. This is part of the empath healing journey, learning that inner power doesn't come from louder words but from steadier roots. Journaling, meditating, or simply sitting by a window at dawn are practices that turn silence into clarity. Each one is a way of setting emotional boundaries that protect energy and sharpen focus. But silence isn't only defensive, it's deeply creative. Some of history's greatest innovators credited quiet solitude for their breakthroughs. Nikola Tesla, for instance, spoke of entire inventions coming to him during silent walks. For empaths, silence allows synchronicity to appear, patterns align, ideas surface, solutions unfold. That's why empath psychology isn't about retreating from the world, but about using silence as a canvas where the unconscious paints its messages. In those moments, silence becomes a power plant, generating insight and strength. It's important, though, to practice silence with intention. Isolation can drain, but purposeful quiet restores. Try setting aside sacred silence each day, 15 minutes with no distractions, just breathing and observing. Over time, this practice rewires how you see conflict, relationships, even yourself. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of being consumed by others' noise, you grow anchored in your own rhythm. That's the subtle but profound shift of shadow work. What once overwhelmed you becomes the very thing that stabilizes you. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: Silence gives empaths the courage to stand in their truth without having to shout it. The inner child, once fragile, learns to trust the quiet as a safe place to rest and grow. Psychiatrist Judith Orloff, in the Empath's Survival Guide, affirms that silence is one of the empath's most powerful healing tools, transforming vulnerability into resilience. Jung hinted that individuation isn't about becoming louder, but about becoming whole. And when an empath transforms silence into inner power, they discover that their quiet presence often changes more than any speech ever could. Which raises one final question: how can this newfound power reshape not only the empath, but also the world around them? So now, let me ask you, how often have you underestimated your own silence? How many times have you believed that staying quiet made you invisible, when in reality, it was your greatest form of presence? Carl Jung's insight reminds us that silence isn't retreat, it's revelation. For the empath, silence is where the shadows surface, where trauma and empathy meet, and where healing begins to take root. Silence is not emptiness. It's an active choice, a force that protects, heals, and transforms. Think about the last time you felt drained after explaining yourself over and over again. Did your words change the other person, or did they only exhaust you? That's the power of silence. It conserves your energy while simultaneously exposing the truth. It sets emotional boundaries without drama. It invites individuation without resistance, and it allows synchronicity to do its quiet work. Your silence is often the loudest response you can give, especially when words would only fuel the fire. Now, here's the challenge. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you keep letting noise dictate your energy, or will you start seeing silence as a tool for transformation? Imagine handling toxic people without losing yourself, simply by refusing to engage in their chaos. Imagine transforming your empath healing journey by giving yourself moments of intentional quiet each day. Silence is the soil where your inner child feels safe again, where the unconscious mind speaks in symbols, and where individuation, the journey of becoming whole, finally takes shape. And maybe you've noticed this. Silence doesn't just change you, it changes the people around you. When you pause, others reveal themselves. When you choose quiet, their unconscious fills the space with truths they were hiding. This is what Jung hinted at, and what modern voices like Judith Orloff confirm. Silence isn't passive, it's magnetic. It draws out honesty, it destabilizes pretense, and it clears the path for deeper connections. You're not withdrawing from life, you're engaging it at a higher level. So here's a practice. This week, choose 3 moments to stay silent when you'd normally explain or defend yourself. It could be in a conversation with family, in a disagreement at work, or even in an argument with yourself. Instead of reacting, stay quiet. Breathe. Journal afterward what you observed, not just in others, but in yourself. Did you notice signs you're an empath that you'd overlooked? Did silence help you see patterns, synchronicities, or even boundaries you hadn't honored before? And as you practice, remember, silence is not about winning or losing. It's about standing in your truth without needing applause. It's about healing for empaths by allowing the unconscious mind to surface, by letting shadow work unfold, and by turning restraint into resilience. Your silence speaks louder than explanations, louder than arguments, louder than defense. It speaks in echoes that shape not only your life, but the lives of those around you. And maybe you've noticed this. Silence doesn't just change you, it changes the people around you. When you pause, others reveal themselves. When you choose quiet, their unconscious fills the space with truths they were hiding. This is what Jung hinted at, and what modern voices like Judith Orloff confirm. Silence isn't passive, it's magnetic. Even movements in the real world prove this. Silent marches and vigils often shake nations more than the loudest protests. Silence speaks with a force that words can't imitate. You're not withdrawing from life. You're engaging it at a higher level. So let me ask you one final, provocative question. If silence holds this much power, what would your life look like if you mastered it? How would your relationships shift? How would your energy change? And how much peace could you finally invite into your world? Don't leave those answers floating. Test them, live them, and let your silence show you the way. And if this message resonated with you, if you felt even a spark of recognition in these words, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and stay with us on this journey of healing, self-discovery, and transformation. Because together, we are not just learning to speak, we are learning to listen. And in a world addicted to noise, that silence might just be the loudest revolution of all.